hidden from sight is a kingdom that rules all life on land.
They're landing on me. We have this coating that's falling right now all around us. They're on your food, they're in your lungs, they're on your skin, they're on each thing you touch. They're each place you go.
They are a single, interconnected network. Could be described as a third mode of life.
It's an alien world of powerful ancient life forms.
This entire web of life is connected, and it's connected through the fungi. Some of those will save us, some of those threaten us, and we're just beginning to understand which are which.
They shaped our world and hold the key to our future. This is the fungal empire.
Fungi are not plants, they're not animals, they're a kingdom in their own right. Many people think of them as plants, perhaps because they don't move, they just sit there. But in fact, fungi are much more closely related to animals than they are to plants. And like animals, they have to eat other organisms.
When we think of fungi at all, we think of mushrooms. But these are just the fruiting bodies, a small part of the fungal life that's all around us.
Ah, look at this. The main part of the fungus is a whole mass of fine filaments, which together form what is called the mycelium.
The mycelium is the actual body of the fungus. It spreads through the soil, eating everything in its path, and even penetrates solid wood.
They can get there by physical penetrative force, but also by producing enzymes which digest the material that they're growing into.
These enzymes are the teeth and claws of fungi.
Well, we're very familiar with single-celled organisms, could be bacteria, and multicellular organisms, so plants and animals. The fungi are unusual because they are a single, interconnected network. So much is unknown. Almost every time we do an experiment, we're seeing something that nobody else has ever seen before. The whole of their growth and development depends on what's going on in their environment. Whereas for animals and plants, for an animal, once you've got your arms and your legs, you don't grow a new one depending on whether you need it or not.
Unlike animals, the body of the fungus is constantly changing shape in a relentless search for food.
It can keep spreading, and it can recycle material that's not useful and use all of that material to grow somewhere else. So it can actually migrate in the environment depending on whether it can find food or not.
During 1 billion years of evolution, fungi have become the masters of survival.
The fungi have been around so long means they've had a long time to figure out the best ways to do everything. The best ways to be lethal. The best way to kill the things they fight. You know, they have 1 billion years of experience in doing the hard work of living.
We have much to learn from this mysterious kingdom, yet we know less than 1% of the estimated 5 million species of fungi.
We're still incredibly ignorant about these organisms. You know, every time you breathe in, you're breathing in hundreds of species of fungi. And even those fungi we've studied for hundreds of years, there are really basic things we don't necessarily know about them.
Microbial explorers Rob Dunn and Anne Madden want to discover how fungi can change our lives.
We don't have to go to far-off lands or distant places because there's new species underneath our feet. With each new species is the promise of a new compound that could be the next greatest antibiotic, or a chemical that could cure cancer, or something that we don't even know what it could do yet.
We've become really interested recently in trying to figure out how do we find not just any new fungus, but fungi that might be useful to people. And so in some cases, that's fungi we might use for making new kinds of beer. In other cases, though, we're looking for fungi that might be able to break down industrial waste, human waste. We'll need fungi to help us deal with that. Most of the coolest stuff nature can do, we haven't discovered yet. And so we both systematically look and we bumble around a little bit. It's cool. Bark's like a magical thing. You lift it and any kind of drama can be playing out underneath it.
It's a microscopic mystery inside a microscopic mystery.
We need some way to guide us toward understanding all of this mystery. And so I think evolutionary history serves as the compass to guide us. It points us in a direction.
This is the great untold story of how fungi shaped all life on land. And to understand it, we need to go way back in evolutionary time. A billion years ago, planet Earth was waking from a prolonged ice age. Retreating glaciers revealed a barren landscape. And yet, from this bleakness came all of the abundance of terrestrial life. In the lava fields of Iceland, we see evidence of the first colonizers.
I'm really excited to see what's living here that we're not seeing. We're forgetting some.
On these rocks, there are signs that microscopic fungi were among the pioneers of life.
About 1 billion years ago, terrestrial Earth started to be colonized by microbes. And those microbes included bacteria and eventually also fungi in crust-like communities.
The first terrestrial fungi survived by mining minerals from rocks. They were literally carving out an existence.
When we look at a volcanic landscape like this one, it's hard to imagine that fungi have anything to do with the story. Fungi are fragile, they're mushrooms and teeny little microscopic spores. And yet fungi are precisely at the center of this story, because fungi are what turn a rock like this into soil.
Fungi eat rock. They produce spores that release acid, breaking up the rock's surface. Fast-growing fungal filaments, hyphae, then drill into the rock to extract a meal of minerals. Using pressure 100 times greater than inside a car tire, the tips of the hyphae can shatter the rock.
What we're looking at here is a kind of molecular mining operation. It's this sort of process through which fungi turn rock to life.
By mineralizing rocks, fungi were slowly laying the groundwork for the arrival of the first plants.
But that next step of colonizing Earth was a big one.
Around 500 million years ago, a group of algae started to move from the ocean to freshwater on land. But to get a foothold, they needed to negotiate with the fungi.
Organisms living in water are bathed in a solution of nutrients. When they move to land, it's a very different scenario. So it's very difficult then to be able to get hold of the water and the nutrients that they need to grow.
One of the major strategies very early on would have been to link up with these fungi that were established on land.
Fungi at the time were living on bacteria and decaying seaweed washed up on the shore. The arrival of land plants offered fungi an easier way to access food.
by exploiting a living organism to get sugar out of them rather than having to excrete their own digestive enzymes and then assimilate all the nutrients. That's energetically a lot less expensive for the fungus, so it makes economical sense.
The algae that appeared in the lakes struck a deal with the fungi. They offered the fungi sugars in return for essential minerals. This mutually beneficial relationship is a form of symbiosis that became one of the most powerful forces of evolution.
And so when that first algal cell hits the terrestrial ground, it was already ready to say, I'm here. Let's form a relationship.
Microbiologist Dr. Eric Holm has reignited this old romance between fungi and algae.
I'm always fascinated, even in human relationships, who's going to hit it off and why?
Dr. Holm's experiment shows that even 500 million years later, fungi and algae still work together.
So if I were to ask you, how long do you think these guys could maybe form a symbiosis together? What would you say?
It doesn't seem like a foregone conclusion that they would form a partnership.
Yes. So they can form a partnership, and this is a result of just 7 days. So not
that's
huge
crazy.
amount of.
So you put these two together, right?
Yes.
That are both just hating life, and in 7 days you get this?
Yes. They find each other.
And so the fact that these are together means that the algae are actually embedded somehow in the hyphae?
Yes, they're actually physically attached.
Oh, that's
like
awesome.
arm in arm.
To me, this is pretty fantastic, and I love the idea that you're remaking this dance that must have happened.
Yes.
And yeah, there's a beauty in that.
Yeah.
This symbiosis between fungi and algae opened the door to the evolution of all land plants. It was the biological Big Bang.
That first jump was a big one in the greening of the dark, dark land.
$450 million years ago, the Earth was teeming with bizarre life forms, but nearly all of them were still in the ocean. The land was void of animals, trees, and flowering plants. Only mosses cushioned the lava fields, and simple plants clung to the banks of rivers.
They had no leaves, they had no roots, and so they were limited to just staying around the water because they had no way of storing it or transporting it.
Like their algae ancestors, these early plants reached out to fungi for help.
Those fungi would have been already well established in the earth at that time, and they would have been able to go a lot deeper and get into smaller crevices in the soil and be able to sort of mine that soil.
Martin Biratondo studies the interaction between fungi and the oldest land plants, liverworts.
Imagine that the fungi were making contact with these plant surfaces, these shallow growing plants, and they would be growing around them rather than into them.
As fungi explored the liverworts, they found their way in between the plant's cells. Some even managed to break inside.
So the fungi were able to occupy the plants themselves and form these beautiful tree-like structures, which we call arbuscules. And it's through these arbuscules that the plants are able to take phosphorus from the fungus. And in return, the plant gives the fungus carbon that it's generated through photosynthesis.
Katie Field can recreate the atmosphere that was around when fungi and liverworts began cooperating.
So what we've done is we've ramped the CO2 right up to around 3 times its level in the current atmosphere. So I'll just have a quick look and see how the liverworts are doing in there. So this is one of my favorite liverworts. This is Troibia lacunosa, and it's actually the most ancient land plant on Earth today. And it's probably really similar to how the very first land plants were back 400 million years ago. And as you can see, it's doing really well under those high CO2 concentrations in this cabinet, which suggests that the fungus is doing its job and it's supplying it with nutrients from the soil, and the plant's doing really well because of that.
By working with fungi, liverworts not only survive, they thrive. Sucking up carbon dioxide and pumping out oxygen, these tiny plants gave the planet its first breath of fresh air. And over time, they changed the composition of the entire atmosphere, paving the way for complex plants.
And so you end up with these much larger plants evolving, which have leaves, stomata, which are able to control the CO2 movement into the leaves, and roots, which are able to, allow the plants to grow really big up above ground.
Ever since, nearly every plant has been nurtured by their symbiotic fungi.
I am still captivated by this whole idea of a plant that is alive, that is healthy, and that is allowing another organism to grow in between its cells and into its cells. And that not only is it allowing them to do that, but it's actually deriving a benefit from it. If fungi had not evolved, it would be a very, very radically different looking kind of planet. We certainly wouldn't be here.
In the golden age of the dinosaurs, the planet was exploding with life. Tree ferns and conifers dotted the landscape. But it was the fungi beneath the ground that was making all this possible.
Fungi are the kind of classic out of sight, out of mind type of organisms. But if you take a step back, the fungi are really the organisms that are putting those plants there.
As trees developed, new types of fungi evolved. They formed partnerships with the roots of trees and gave rise to entire forests.
These are lineages of fungi that are able to do something quite different in the soil than what the early fungi that were involved in allowing plants to colonize land could do.
Above ground, these new fungi are characterized by their fruiting bodies, mushrooms. But beneath the surface, they form complex networks. Scientists call it the wood wide web.
In fact, there are two sorts of wood wide web. One sort is formed by the decomposer fungi, the rotters that break down dead plant material, and they interconnect between lots of different dead resources.
Without these decomposers, life in the forest would soon be buried under dead material. Fungi eat this material, and in doing so, they create new life.
They're the garbage disposal agents of the natural world. They break down dead organic matter, and by doing that, they release nutrients, and those nutrients are then made available for plants to carry on growing. Otherwise, all the nutrients on the planet would be locked up in dead stuff.
The second type of wood wide web is formed between living plants, especially trees. Hungry for food, the fungal filaments called hyphae search for tree roots. They envelop the root, and some find their way inside. Here they provide water and minerals in exchange for sugars. But this is more than a trade. The entire forest is now connected through the fungi.
If you summed up the distance traveled by the hyphae just beneath a single foot, it would be more than 500 kilometers of hyphae, a vast network that traffics in everything that forests need.
This is nature's internet, an information highway that allows trees to communicate and even send out danger signals to each other. Rather than a collection of individual trees, a forest operates more like a superorganism. connected by the fungal network, a lush and vibrant planet emerged. But hundreds of millions of years of evolution would be blown away in a single moment. An asteroid strike wiped out 70% of all species. Yet fungi, nature's ultimate survivor, would turn the cataclysm to its advantage.
The Earth became a fungal compost. Think about it. Overnight, you have this catastrophe. Dust is kicked up, there is no sunlight, and you have all this decaying plant matter. The fungi then can reproduce very rapidly.
In this expanse of death, fungi inherited the Earth. And incredibly, without this catastrophe, we wouldn't be here. An otherwise insignificant animal group survived, the mammals, from which humans would eventually evolve. It's thought that they were immune to the fungi's lethal onslaught.
Mammals have one built-in advantage relative to the reptiles. They're hot. The reptiles are quite susceptible to fungal diseases, but your typical mammal, which maintains a temperature in the mid-30s or so, creates a thermal exclusionary zone for fungi.
It's an intriguing theory, and if correct, the temperatures of warm-blooded animals would be above the temperature tolerated by most fungi. Arturo Casadevall's team set out to test the hypothesis.
So after 2 days in culture at either 25 degrees, which is ambient room temperature, or 37 degrees, which is human body temperature, we can see that there are differences in growth. So on the 25-degree plate, we can see all 4 of these strains grew. But on our 37-degree plate, we can see 2 of those fungi haven't grown at all. And that's because they don't survive at 37, and it happens to be that those are the same ones that cannot infect people.
The narrow margin protecting us from fungal pathogens is the difference between life and death. In America, millions of little bats are dying from a newly arrived fungus.
Bats are like us, warm-blooded. However, the bats hibernate in the winter, and when their temperature drops, they become susceptible to this fungal disease. Here is the interesting thing. If you take the bats when they're infected and you feed them, wake them up, and let their temperatures go up, they're able to control the fungal disease. But when they're cold, their immune system cannot do it by itself.
Protected by their high temperature, mammals were free to roam the fungi-dominated world. This is Ötzi, the Iceman, a victim of a Neolithic murder. His body was perfectly preserved in the ice for thousands of years, and among his belongings were some intriguing items.
There were 2 objects which were a big mystery in the beginning. They turned later out to be fungi, polypores. We were thinking, could it be food? But you would not put a lot of work in food to make it so nicely ornamented.
Dr. Ursula Peintner is one of the scientists who studied these mushrooms. The evidence suggests they were much more than decoration.
Now we know that it's enhancing your immune system, and it will help you also against cancer, against inflammations, antiviral, it's antibacterial, so it has a huge array of medicinal properties.
Ötzi's polypores are the first recorded use of mushrooms as medicine. But for the Iceman, it meant even more.
It was a talisman. It was spiritual, like bringing the Spirit of God with you to protect you on your journey.
In Western culture, the power of mushrooms would soon be forgotten, and it's only an accident that revived it. In 1928, fungal spores blew through the window of a London hospital. They landed in a petri dish in the laboratory of Alexander Fleming. This fungus, called penicillium, would change the course of human history.
He looked at one of these unusual petri dishes, and at that interface between the bacteria and the fungi was a zone where nothing was growing. What he would come to realize was that was the zone where the fungi were producing enzymes, chemicals, that were outside of the body of the fungus and killing the bacteria. And that's the germ of the discovery of antibiotics.
For most of history, humanity was decimated by bacterial epidemics. But since the first penicillin pill, world population has tripled and allowed us to build vast cities, changing the face of the planet.
We're expected to add another 2 billion people to the planet. We'll need more food. With that number of people, we'll need more antibiotics. And so we're going to need to depend on fungi more than we do today.
The life-saving power of antibiotics is the outcome of an ancient war. Fungi and bacteria are sworn enemies.
Wherever fungi are growing, they encounter bacteria, and over millions and millions of years, they've evolved mechanisms to kill those bacteria.
But bacteria are constantly evolving, and as a result, we're now facing a global crisis of antibiotic resistance. Unless we find a solution, hundreds of millions will die.
The challenge is we don't have any new drugs. And what we need to do is find new ways to overcome this problem.
Microbiologist Jerry Wright wondered if fungi had evolved ways of overcoming bacterial resistance. And that meant returning to the soil, looking for a compound that might help to safeguard our antibiotics.
Hey guys, got some more dirt for you. It came from the back of the university. See if you can't get anything cool out of it.
Okay, sounds good.
We screened 10,000 extracts that we had collected from microorganisms around various environments. And from that 10,000 extracts, we found one that had excellent activity at overcoming resistance. We call it AMA for short, because Aspergillus marasmii is too much to say every day.
Incredibly, this compound, produced by a common soil fungus, Aspergillus, can restore the power of our antibiotics.
And when I saw the result, I honestly didn't believe it. It just seemed relatively too easy to do. But it turned out to be real. So every week, every month, as we continued to work on this compound and kept saying, well, can it be used for pneumonia or can it be used for this kind of an infection? Every time we did this an experiment like this, it was proving to be really effective.
When these fungal molecules were added to antibiotics, even the most resistant superbugs were defeated.
I've been working in this field for 25 years. We've never had any molecule that's shown to be that potent, and that's insanely exciting.
The kingdom of fungi is nature's chemical factory, offering immense benefits to humanity. Already, half of our 20 most valuable medicines are derived from fungi, including immunosuppressants and cholesterol-lowering statins.
Many of the new drugs we're thinking about are coming from fungi. And so in your everyday life, they're this magic set of compounds that we rely on.
Scientists are now investigating the benefits of a wide range of mushrooms for their anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, antioxidant, and immune stimulant properties.
The challenging thing as a scientist is trying to understand why they're doing it and how do we tap into that. and actually enhance our chances of finding what we want.
With millions of potential candidates, the search for beneficial fungi needs clever detective work.
You know, the great thing is there are a bunch of insects that we know probably have useful fungi, but then there are lots of other insects that nobody's ever studied in the context of fungi. And so what we've started to do is to look to social insects who, like us, have many challenges with microbial pathogens that would like nothing other than to destroy their entire society. Holy moly.
One promising candidate is nature's worst housekeeper, the winnow ant. Seemingly oblivious to hygiene, the ants live surrounded by waste and decaying bodies.
Right next to the larvae and the eggs, we found a whole bunch of ant poop and ant skeletons, dead ants. And so almost certainly that means the ants are doing something interesting. Think about it in the context of your own life. If you had in your bedroom a bunch of poop and dead bodies, you'd immediately worry about, well, how did they get there? But also about pathogens, right? Look, how do you prevent the pathogens associated with those things from killing you? What we're doing here is collecting the ants, but also collecting some of the garbage. And what we want to do is figure out if in that garbage there's a fungus, which could be useful as an antibiotic, but also that the ants might be using to break down what's the waste in their colony.
In the lab, Anne Madden recovers the fungi found on the ants, shedding light on a previously unseen world.
So this is my favorite part because you never really know what's going to grow from these insects on a Petri plate. It's crazy diversity for one insect.
That's awesome.
We're seeing different fungi here, but it's likely that there are more species here than we can even see.
My biggest hope is that this has got antibiotic-producing fungi in it, that this has got fungi that we can use to clean up human waste. Yeah, I guess we don't know what these are yet, right?
Right, so we have to do further genetic sequencing to find out who they are so that afterwards we can find out what they do.
It makes me antsy not to know. Is that too much? Yeah, sorry.
We've barely begun our journey into the mysterious kingdom of fungi. There are wonders to be discovered wherever we search.
So if we look to many of our problems and we think about what the challenge is, fungi offer a vast reservoir of possibilities, both because of their mastery of chemistry and because of their diversity.
Fungi are nature's great survivors. This makes them both powerful allies and, given the chance, formidable enemies. An epidemic on Canada's west coast is a warning of fungi's lethal power. In 2001, veterinarians on Vancouver Island noticed something unusual. Many cats and dogs had developed lumps under their skin and were having trouble breathing.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gasquire's office.
Soon, people began complaining of stubborn coughs, headaches, and night sweats. X-rays revealed shadows on their lungs.
They thought they had cancer. They were told that by their surgeons, and so they cut it out, and lo and behold, it was not a cancer. It was a fungal infection.
The culprit turned out to be Cryptococcus gattii, a relatively harmless fungus previously only seen in tropical environments like Australia.
The question was, how did it get here? We did not know, and this is where we've a bit of a detective story to sort that out.
What we are really looking at when we're looking at fungi is evolution itself.
Karen Bartlett is a microbe hunter. When C. gattii appeared, it was her job to locate it in the wild. There was no time to lose. C. gattii had already infected hundreds of people, killing more than 1 in 10.
Once we knew that it was gattii, then we contacted our Australian colleagues where it's endemic and primarily associated with eucalyptus trees. It gave us at least something to go on, the trees. And that was our initial starting point, but I was also taking air samples, and that was actually the big breakthrough.
All you really need is to get the spores airborne. and there is no way of controlling it.
With an infection rate 10 times higher than in Australia, Vancouver Island was declared a hot zone.
Standing in the middle of these trees, in the middle of literally a forest, and not knowing whether it was going to be an epidemic curve, it was pretty sobering. The second thing that crossed my mind at that point was that because I was the one there taking the samples, is if I had a risk of coming down with cryptococcal disease or not.
What made C. gaddii scary was that it could also badly affect healthy people.
It's very, very unusual.
Left undetected, the infection can be lethal. Ken James, a former mill worker from Duncan, was lucky. His life was saved by coincidence.
The BC Centre for Disease Control is issuing a health warning. Here are the symptoms to watch out for.
They were doing a report on this cryptococcus disease on Channel 6 News out of Victoria. They started going through the symptoms, and I was like, yep, check, check, check. And basically I had pretty much all of the symptoms that it described.
Undiagnosed fever, night sweats, neck stiffness, and
Dr. Esquire got a sample, took it and cultured it, and came back and said that I did in fact have cryptococcus.
Invasive fungal infections are difficult to treat, and early diagnosis is essential.
It's very hard to treat them. To give you an example, if you have bacterial pneumonia, you can often be treated for 2 weeks and you get better. When you have a fungal disease, you often have to treat for many months.
I was on the medication for a year. Had I not seen that TV show, I might not be here talking to you today, right? And I mean, people have died from it.
Not everyone is as lucky as Ken. The infection can become lethal when the fungus finds its way from the lung to the brain.
You got this fungal infection that would surround your brain, and then some people would actually invade the brain tissue. And so we could see small lesions that would look like holes, Swiss cheese in their brain.
But how can a harmless yeast that thrives in soil find a way to invade and kill healthy humans?
It's because the ecology of the soil. There are other organisms there, including amoeba, soil amoeba. Now, they are animals. They do move around, and they eat other organisms for their food source.
In this evolutionary arms race, C. gaddii built a protective shield to avoid being eaten.
Now, shift that whole concept to the human body. As humans, we have a primary defense system that it's called white blood cells. And if you were naively looking at them under the microscope, they don't look a whole bunch different than soil amoeba do.
Just like amoeba in the soil, our white blood cells, the macrophages, engulf invading microbes. But C. gaddii is equipped to deal with this challenge.
The same traits that allow them to survive amoeba allow them to survive macrophages in the lung.
Long before the first human, this fungus had evolved the means to kill us should we cross paths.
Probably would have lived out its happy little life without our even knowing it was here.
Cryptococcus gaddii lay peacefully in the environment until conditions changed, and the change was global warming.
We know that over the last 40 years, the average mean temperature has gone up by a degree or two in this particular area. We have longer dry spells, and so as soon as you get that dust stirred up, the possibility of people inhaling the propagule goes up, and so the possibility of people coming down with cryptococcal disease goes up.
C. gaddii is on the move. It was localized to Australia, then in a blink of an eye, this becomes a worldwide problem. It's spreading through the United States, and we think that this has established itself in this continent, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of it.
The Vancouver outbreak is a cautionary tale in the warming world. Given the opportunity, fungi are always ready to invade new territory, including us.
It has only been by very good fortune that humans in general have only a few pathogenic fungi, because there are only a few pathogenic fungi that can grow at 37 degrees, i.e. human body temperature. That's been our savior.
But as the planet warms, more and more fungi are forced to adapt to new conditions.
Therefore, organisms that are out there but are not capable of causing disease today because their temperatures keep them out could become new pathogens.
Fungi will continue to evolve in unpredictable ways. To ignore them is both a lost opportunity and a dangerous mistake.
And so I think it's more important than ever to understand what this relationship we have is with fungi, because we don't have control over them. And we're hoping that we can keep this mostly peaceful relationship going.
Since the dawn of life, fungi have been the driver of evolution on land. They ate the rocks that created the soils and nurtured the plants that turned the planet green.
To have the planet that we have today, we had to have fungi.
It was fungi that brought back life after each global catastrophe.
If there were no fungi, there would be no other life. They're a keystone in our world.
It was fungi that paved the way for civilization. They have made us who we are.
All around you are these fungi that are falling on you, that are going to alter our fate as humans, and we're just starting to figure it out.
As we continue to explore the fungal empire, our most exciting discoveries are yet to come.